Hi, I would like to talk for a moment about what my direct experience has been. And I find that direct experience, spiritual experience, life experience, to me, there's really no difference, um, is the teacher, the primary teacher. And because there is no difference between what we are and life itself, then we find that the teacher is our very self, our very selves. And I have found that when I try to constrain myself to a particular language of spirituality or psychology or self help in my own sharing, that I inevitably am not sharing as directly as I could in terms of what I understand to be true and what I have experienced to be true. Because when we come from a particular movement or teaching, there's a part of the mind that is referring back to the language of that teaching, the memory of how other people have shared. And so for me, this journey, which some of you know, actually didn't begin in the three principles, but began with the book Love by Leo Buscaglia when I was in high school. And before that, as a child, in my own joy of living and connection to life, which was a teaching in itself. Um, and then, of course, there was the experience of being involved in the three principles world and meeting Sydney Banks, which was a blessing. I can't imagine having a more blessed life than what I've had. And yet, I have noticed because of beautiful teachers and teachings, people like Sydney Banks and Gangaji and Tony Packer and Jean Klein and many others, the pointing is always back to, the true pointing is always back to one's own experience. And it can be confusing to try to interpret an experience through words that we've heard. Now, I'm not saying there isn't a role for teachings and movements and forms and practices. I think that all of these are necessary and actually exist because people in their journey home, what I call their apparent journey home, seem to need these. You know, they seem appropriate at times. It's a way for people to stop and begin to even consider that they can quiet their minds. So, and of course, I support the movements around Gangaji and Tony Packer and the three principles totally, and in some ways am quite involved in those movements. But I noticed how in my attempts to conform to movements or languages or teachings, I could sometimes lose sight of what was true in my experience. And I've just come to realize that my experience is always what I share. It's all that I can share. It's all that I can give. There's nothing, of course, outside of my experience that I can give. So, what in my experience has been revealing? And having just done a video on being versus doing, I wanted to share my experience of having been through the loss of identity completely and totally in my 20s. Today, I realize that this is the death experience that people speak of. This was the death experience. For me, it wasn't frightening. It wasn't feeling as if my heart would explode. I've heard some people speak of these things. It was a simple letting go of the personal thought system. It was such a simple thought. It was in the midst of a crisis of fearful thought and depression and spiraling, a whirlwind of negative, fearful, personal thinking. In the midst of that whirlwind, I had one thought, and the thought was, there is more to life than what I think about it. That's it. To me now, it seems so simple as to almost be a little bit, not stupid, but kind of just like, what's so special about that thought? But in the moment when I thought it, suddenly I was transported beyond the body and beyond my personal identity, my personality. And this is now what I see, this space, this place. I sometimes call it inner outer space. It was like being in outer space, but it was also completely within me, was the space of awareness that I now hear people talk about, that is awareness without object. Now, to be perfectly frank with you, I don't continue to walk and move around in this world and live in this realized state. But it was important for me to have had that experience. It was in that space that I realized this is where we are all one. This is the Christ consciousness. Within awareness, this simple awareness of almost nothing. If there was anything, I wasn't aware of any form. All there was a tremendous love, tremendous, unconditional, universal, expansive love. And those words do not do the feeling justice. So it actually hasn't been until the last few years that I have reflected back on that experience and what it meant to me. Today it means more and more. And again, I don't pretend to walk around in that state. In fact, I don't, as far as I know, and my understanding is limited, there's nothing happening that you can't even be walking around because there's no body to do the walking. There's no separate entity making decisions and achieving goals. And so that was another reason I wanted to make this video, is because on the last video I talked about being versus doing. And when we're in a state of being, doing happens naturally. It happens as a function of simple survival. It happens as a function of expressed creativity, of the dance of life that we find ourselves in. But ultimately, what we are is prior to all being and all doing, meaning all being as an entity, as a separate entity, and all doing that any such entity would undertake. So I thought it important to share that in the context of being and doing, because ultimately there's nothing going on. It's just, and yet within this nothingness, this nothing going on, the 10,000 things, the polyverses and the multiverses. They say now there's not just one universe, there's infinite universes, universes within universes, universes within the space between these two fingers. Constant creation, simultaneous to itself. And this is what we are, this energy. How could we not be? I just had lunch with a beautiful woman who said, I understand that I am God, or I've heard that, and I understand it sometimes, and sometimes I don't. And I understand what she was saying. in this world of relativity. We have an identity that one is created from thought, from the power of thought, that sees itself as separate because it sees itself as having been created. There's a creation that it's almost invisible, but it's like, this is who I am. And so therefore I need to reach God or understand that I am part of God. And I've been there, so I respect that perspective. But when you start to understand that principle of mind, that mind is the energy and intelligence of all things, whether in form or formless, then there is no separation between the form and the formless. And there is no way that one can be outside of God. All of creation, including the creation of oneself and one's limited identity, occur within this energy of God. It is thought that gives us the ability to differentiate and to create. Without thought, there would be no creation. So I don't claim to be the most knowledgeable person on this subject, but I made this video because I was thinking to myself, if I weren't feeling constrained by any thought of a particular way of speaking or fitting into a particular teaching or lineage, what would I share directly from the heart? And this is what I would share. And honestly, from that moment of experience, unlike Sydney Banks, who, got some traction going with that, I went back into a separate self, a sense of a separate self, and feelings of insecurity. And it's been a long road, and a long illusionary road over time, over 25, 26 years of having insights that were completely unnecessary to take me back to the knowing that I am this energy. You are this energy. We are this energy. And everything happening within this energy is the play, the dance of life, the dance of form. So I thought that's what I would share with you today. And I appreciate, if you're listening, I appreciate your listening. Because in the listening, in the sharing, we connect. Because love arises, the feeling of love, and that is what we are. That is what we share. That is the eternal. That which does not come and go, that which is at the heart of all being and all form, including what you think you are. So thank you for listening, and God bless you, as is always the case.